So this video is a little bit different because it's all about getting over the fear of posting your work online for either just getting it out there or receiving design critique in general. Because especially for newer people getting into design, it can be really hard to get over that initial step of making something and then actually being willing to show other people what you've done, because that first few times you post something online can oftentimes be the most difficult because it just runs through your head like, is this good enough? Are people going to make fun of me? All that stuff that really doesn't help you become a better designer, but nonetheless is a fear that you will tend to have. So I'm going to show a few different places and give a few different ideas of why it's really important to go ahead and post your work online and show other people what you're doing, and most importantly receive feedback on your work so that you can really improve and grow as a designer. So I just have some basic windows opened up here to show what I'm talking about of different websites that you can post your work online. But the first and most important thing to keep in your head when you're considering posting your work for your first time, maybe you think you're just not good enough or you're a bit afraid to post your work, the biggest thing to consider is that if you don't ever post your work, if people don't see what you do, number one, you have basically a 0% chance of ever succeeding as a designer, because in essence your job is to show people your work. Your job is to communicate to people, to help people learn from what you're doing, to convey ideas, messages, whatever the case may be for your specific type of design. The end result is almost always someone else looking at it and hopefully gaining some kind of value from it, some kind of information. Even if your design style is something like user experience design, where you might not be making visual choices so much as the order of which things are displayed and how people interact with what you're doing, all that stuff, it's still super important for people to see the changes you've made, because especially in something like user experience design, it's all about data of how people actually use what you're doing or actually use the thing that you're trying to improve, because that data really just helps inform your decisions, and if no one saw it, you would have no way of knowing how to improve what it is that you're doing. So really, no matter what kind of design you do, it could be furniture design, it could be poster design, t-shirt design, print, web, it doesn't matter. It's so important that people see it. So here is one place that you can post your designs for critique, and this is Reddit r/design critiques, and I'll try to remember to put all this in the description, some of these different websites for you to check out. I'm just going to show a couple here. There are many of them on the internet in general, but this is a pretty decent one actually, because the feedback tends to be somewhat constructive most of the time, and you get some more honest feedback than some of the other places I'll show that are much more forgiving or friendly in general. So I just picked a couple different random ones right here to show, to give you a good idea of what you can expect when you post something on here. So this one's just like, hey, I made some typographic posters, would appreciate an opinion. They link this Behance page that has these different typographic posters. And just another thing to consider too, on anywhere you post online, you don't have to use your real name. You can use a username and no one would ever really know who actually designed this thing. So if you're just starting out, you don't want to have your first few pieces linked to your real name, you could go ahead and just use a username and post there to get initial feedback, and as you grow and improve as a designer, you can then use your real name and post stuff on there and start really gaining a reputation for yourself. So the comments here are basically just telling, you know, like, I like the second one, third one, nice balance, nicely composed, and then the second one is actually a little bit more of a critique, because it says, hey, if this is a poster, I don't really have a way of telling where the edges of the page are. And for something like composition, it's actually really important to know how this is going to fall on the page, how much of the page this is going to take up. So it was really thoughtful criticism there, because it's important to keep in mind, it's nice to get positive comments like, hey, these look really great and it's the best thing I've ever seen. But if that's all you get, if all you get is really positive comments like that, you're going to have a super hard time growing as a designer, because you won't know what your shortcomings are. You won't know how to improve what it is that you are doing. So sometimes, in many cases actually, the best feedback you'll get is a bit more critical of what you're doing, but it will also offer specific suggestions of how you can go in and improve that. So for this first one right here, a nice suggestion to take away is that you should really show the page boundaries so people can tell exactly how this falls on the page, and they'll get a better idea of how you're trying to compose this and what you've been really thinking about and how you might go about solving that problem, especially on something like an online display. So on this one is actually a really interesting example, because it's about designing banknotes, which is something that most people don't consider about with design, but it's a huge part of it because people use banknotes all the time. So like dollar bills, for example, and they have their examples shown right here, which I'll just make larger so you can see what they're talking about. So overall, you can look at these and like, wow, this is pretty darn cool. Lots of colors going on, some interesting stuff overall. But one of the major comments, which I actually thought was kind of funny because it's so true, is, I see your warrior with the trident sitting in a wheelchair. how do you not see this? In which case, if I bring this back up here, you can see that the warrior does indeed look like it's sitting in a wheelchair with a trident on that wheel. So little pieces of feedback like that, when you're too close to the design, we've been working on this for hours and hours and hours, you might not even pay attention to like, oh, this guy looks like he's in a wheelchair. Not that that's a bad thing, but if it's unintended, if it is going to give people a connotation on your banknote that you did not intend for it to have, it's really important to hear stuff like that from people, because you might not see it, but someone else will just instantly come in on it and be like, hey, did you see this? And if you didn't, it's really great to receive that kind of feedback. In this particular thread, it's also super interesting because this person says, as a politician who was also a freelance graphics designer, and it's just like, where in general can you get feedback like that? That's a internet sort of thing. Like, how often do you run across a politician who also happens to design graphics in their free time? So they give feedback on political points of view as well, because they're thinking about much broader things in terms of how will governments actually go in and use these notes? What considerations should you have for people who actually want to use these at the government scale? Because they have very specific limitations, they have specific desires that your average designer will just never know unless you really go in and research this stuff and figure out what those are exactly. That kind of feedback is super valuable, and you'll really learn and grow from it, because it'll just be one more thing that you'll have in your mind as you move forward about how you can improve your work and some of the considerations you have to think about. Like, if you design these and you didn't think about like, hey, how will the government, in this case Great Britain and Northern Ireland, actually go ahead and use these? Will these fit their needs for what bills need to have? And if not, what can I do to improve them? Stuff like that is just super cool to think about and will make you a stronger designer in every aspect of what you do. And I should note too, especially on a website like Reddit, some people will give feedback that's just straight up not helpful, not constructive. It could just be like, this sucks, or this is terrible, this is the worst. That's just a part of the internet in general, and something you'll kind of have to get good at dealing with, because no matter where you work or what you do, there'll be people like that that'll just throw down negativity and not give you any sort of constructive feedback to actually improve upon what you're doing. But the most important for me when I see feedback like that is, if the person, number one, isn't using their real name, if they're using that under a username and they haven't posted any work, you have no context if they're even a designer, if they're a good designer, anything like that. And if they're just throwing out negative attitudes just to be basically a jerk online, I really wouldn't take them too seriously, because people who tend to be the best at what they do tend to always give at least constructive feedback, where they'll let you know why they think something isn't good enough, or they'll let you know where you can really focus to improve. Because you don't become one of the best people by just constantly throwing out negativity everywhere and not being constructive to everyone else, because in the end, no one else is going to want to work with you. That's not the kind of way or reputation that you want to set up for yourself. So when you see a super negative comment, scan it for anything that could be potentially constructive. Sometimes a really negative comment can have at least a word or a phrase that might make you think twice about what you've done. I've had that happen in the past where people were like, this is the stupidest video I've ever seen. Why would anyone watch this? Blah, blah, blah. It's way too long and doesn't actually accomplish much. So the first part wasn't helpful to me at all, but it did make me think, hey, how can I shorten these videos? How can I accomplish the end goal of the video quicker to get people moving along a bit faster? And is the end result something that people actually want to create or see? Because if not, what is the purpose of even making a video to describe it? So do your best to find the positive in a super negative statement, because it'll just help you get at least a little bit of value out of some internet trolls who might be out there just trying to throw negativity around, but they actually might unintentionally help you, which is kind of a cool thing to think about. That you can take someone who's trying to be distinctly negative and use their feedback for a positive reason. So definitely check out r/design critiques. So it's r and then design_critiques. And I'll try to remember to put that link in the description. Just yell at me if it's not there. I'll throw it back in as soon as I see that comment. But they'll be really helpful in general. And also the mods on here will tend to remove stuff that's just straight up terrible comments, stuff like that. So it should be a decent starting point for you to get some feedback. And if you're trying to post your work online and you really don't want to see negative feedback at first, which I don't think is necessarily the best way of going about it, but there are a few websites where the comment sections are almost always positive, and one of those is Society6. So all this work is on the front page of the popular page, so it tends to be really good stuff, but I'll just click on one right here so you can check out this particular item. I'll Nice pop-up. Thank you, Society6. But this is society6.com, and if I go down to the comments sections right here, I'll just go to see more comments. Pretty much all the comments on this website are like, this is really cool, this is great, this is the best. So if you're looking for a way to show your work, and then of course if you want to make sure the feedback for the most part is somewhat positive to kind of reinforce you and make you keep on going forward until you can accept some more actual critiques, this might be a cool place to get started. And also, since you can sell your work here, you might make some money. Odds are you probably won't, because it's actually kind of hard to find an audience who buys stuff on here. But like I said, the comments tend to be pretty positive, and it is a very active, very vibrant community of artists and designers, photographers, pretty much any creative aspect that you can display online. You'll find some people here, and it'll be a really good inspiration point for that as well. Same goes for Dribble, which I'll also try to link in the description. This one is invite only, so if you're a newer designer, odds are you won't have an invite here, but feel free to check out all the different stuff that's posted here as inspiration for how to think about what you're doing, different ways other people who tend to be some of the very best in the industry at what they do, how they're applying their ideas to similar ideas as yours. And you can really just, by looking at stuff, so if I go to this right here and you're trying to illustrate something, you can see the way they illustrated this, the different stylistic choices they made. And once again, this comment section is almost always super positive on Dribble. I very rarely see critique or constructive criticism on the comments here. I do see it sometimes, but it's pretty rare. I actually think that's kind of a downfall of Dribble in general. That is kind of a high five fest about, hey, you're so awesome, which doesn't let the people here grow as quickly as they could if there was a lot more constructive criticism going on. But nevertheless, it is a very vibrant community, one of the most vibrant of any design community. And if nothing else, when you check out, like, let's say the popular section of this, you'll see some super well done illustrations, designs, interfaces, pretty much everything creative. A lot of people on here are at the top of what they do, so it's a really great inspiration point to see what's going on. And of course, these are just a couple different places to check out work, to post your work, to get some feedback on work. I actually think Reddit r/design critiques is one of the better ones to actually get feedback on, because that feedback is what will help you grow the most. Just be sure to kind of get a lot of feedback from a lot of different people so you can get a really diverse selection of different constructive feedback items to use on your behalf and to grow from. And this example, by the way, is on Behance, which is a really good spot to post work as well. I'll do my best to remember to link that off, but it's just behance.net. So like I said before, really, if you want to work professionally as a designer in almost any aspect of design you can think of, one of the most critical steps you can take is be willing to post your work online, be willing to get constructive feedback, constructive criticism, especially once you start working with client-driven work. Clients who don't have a design background might not give you feedback that seems all that useful because they don't have the context of information that a professional designer has, but it's really important that you learn how to take in what a client is saying to try to boil down what they say. Like, they could say something as generic as, this needs to pop more. And you'll have to figure out to the best of your ability, like, what do they mean pop more? Do they want bolder lines? Do they want brighter colors? And through communication with a client, you'll be able to eventually figure out what they mean and how you can improve your work in their eyes, because sometimes their idea of really good work might not actually be really good work, but it's a delicate balancing act of pleasing the client and also producing something that's really meaningful and well constructed and will solve the problem for the client appropriately. And that's where feedback from actual designers will help you get to a stage where you can really figure out what the client's looking for and how to please both the client and yourself, most importantly, so that you're producing meaningful work that you really care about. And that's pretty much the almost end of this video, but I just want to show you a quote quick that I actually found on Reddit. And there's a really popular dance music producer called Avicii. I might be saying that wrong. I'm actually not sure at all. It could be Avicii or Avicii, one of those two, or maybe something totally different. But this is a super early forum post from him, and this is, I believe, in Swedish, I'm not sure, but it's basically saying, hey everyone, I hope this is in the right spot. I got some songs and I'd like to know what you think about it. If you could please let me know what you liked and why, thanks. And then a few weeks later he actually posted, like, anyone? So in this case he was actually looking for constructive criticism, and in this case no one replied, which can be a really terrible feeling when you're out there looking for someone to just give some kind of feedback for what you're doing. You could have spent weeks or months on that song or design or whatever the case is in this particular example. This is a MySpace page, which is kind of funny, but that was really a huge way for people to get noticed back then, because this was 2007, like I said before. So he could have very easily just given up right here, where he didn't receive any feedback or any kind of support from the community he was hoping to get some from. But obviously in this case, he went on to continue pursuing what he did. He kept getting feedback from people and growing and doing more songs, until today he's one of the largest music producers in the world, making tens of millions most likely every year doing what he loves to do. So just be persistent, be willing to put your work out there, put your heart into it, and don't take things too personally, because ultimately you're going to be one of your own hardest critics when it comes to your design work. You're always going to want to improve. At least if you're going to be one of the best people out there, you're always going to strive to do a little bit better than you could before, to put out work that's just a little bit stronger than it was the week before, and that's how you'll slowly but surely find your way becoming one of the better designers out there. So this is a bit different video, so if you like videos like this, if you want me to just talk about my feelings on different design subjects, feel free to leave a comment and let me know. And if you did end up finding this helpful, feel free to like and favorite this video. And if you want to see more videos like this every week, please subscribe. I do my best to put out new content every week for designers, from videos just like this one to things like Photoshop and Illustrator tutorials. But that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching.